Hey team, hope everybody's having a good Thursday. I'm really sorry I couldn't make it. Larry, best to you, and I hope the session is going well. Just in case you guys didn't know who I was, I added my picture. Um, this was just an opening slide that I just used from one of the other CFA presentations just to add it in. So Larry had asked me to kind of give an update on some of the work I've been doing, specifically in South Dakota, and then of course Valley View, which has done just a tremendous amount of CFA work. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. The South Dakota Department of Ed work, this started last summer with a cohort of about 25 teachers, all science, K 12. We did a 2 day in July and then days 3 and 4 in August, just a real solid, intense 4 days of the CFA process. And then we had scheduled 2 follow-up days just with that group. Now we met in it's not Pierre, it's Pierre, South Dakota. I found out the folks were coming from all over the state, and for the days in July and August, they supported everybody to come in and paid their meals and their hotels and things. When they came in November, December, we still met at a central location, but folks were not reimbursed, and weather was not the best when we came in December. So those days were only about 5 hours long. And really, what it was a chance to go back through some of the specific steps, more practice, more feedback, and go a little bit deeper with the implementation for they're required for the grant that they're going through. The teachers all get paid, I think, almost $1,000 to fully implement 2 CFA. So one of the things we're going to be working on, myself and Sam Shaw, who's my contact there, between now and probably around April 1st, is really gathering some summary data information, not only from their results, but also just some of their takeaways. One of the big pieces of feedback that they really shared was, as much as anything, this was a shift for almost all of their teachers that I was working with. They had never really looked at any of their standards in as depth as they have, and South Dakota really they did not go next generation. They kind of adapted their own science standards, similar in a lot of ways to some of the next generation standards, but actually in many ways had some literacy skills embedded within them. But for the most part, it was a shift in terms of everything to do with assessment, and then also instruction wise, the idea that we would line up the learning progressions and progress checks and look at the instructional tasks we would actually do with the students was a shift for some. It was interesting to see in a positive way some of the takeaways from folks that were a little bit indifferent in August and were coming around in November, and were actually some of the folks who stayed the latest on the December date to go as deep as they could. And I had just kind of mentioned this. They had really not looked at the standards in the way that unwrapping forced them to. And it was really a major shift for a lot of them in the formative mindset that they had really had a chance to look at not only how they assess students, but what they really do in terms of their instructional alignment and their tasks and their assignments that they put in front of kids. So there's still 2 pending webinars that I'm doing for that team. And as I said, they are from all over the state of South Dakota, all 4 quadrants, and just happen to come to that central location. Some of the teachers are on a team of 3 or 4, and some of them are the science department 712. And some, as you can imagine, some of the smaller rural areas of South Dakota. So that was a shift or a different way to look at some of the pieces throughout the 4 days, and challenge me a little bit on how to give them support and feedback, as opposed to somebody who really will be doing this in a more collaborative setting. But we've set up a few networks for some of those teachers that have been isolated, not only geographically, but from other science peers, to connect electronically. And hopefully that will continue on. Next steps for that group, it's TBD at this stage. Money is a little bit of an issue. Some of their ESSA funds have been appropriated differently than they had planned originally. They had considered certification with this team, but for now that's on hold, mainly for the financial aspect. And to be honest, as Sam and I talked, out of the 25, maybe 12 to 14 really would have been not just ready, but weren't able to do something with it. So really we talked about the next steps possibly are instead of, because financially they can add on a couple more cohorts, they'll be more cost effective at this stage than the certification would. They just simply cannot. So I'm going to have a webinar sometime in the next few weeks. Kelly's going to join me with his math and ELA counterparts to talk about building in another cohort that isn't just science, but also builds in math and ELA and possibly even social studies as well. So that's kind of the update there. Digging into Valley View, which is where we've done a tremendous amount of work. And for those of you who might have seen, we'll be doing a session, Karen Flores and myself, on Friday, connecting visible learning to CFA, which is why really the CFA work really took off there. But little bit of an update about what we've done this school year. So in 2016, three different cohorts of about 50 teachers have gone through the 4 days of CFA. And I'm going to speak a little bit how, through their feedback and really Karen and Fielder's direction, we've made some adjustments on how those next two cohorts are going through. Two of the cohorts were specifically just special education teachers. One group was K-5, one was 6-8. They have only completed days 1 and 2. And we've had 3 implementation days on site so far. Also, last May, we certified a group of 10. It was all central office, district level coaches, directors. There was one building level principal who was certified. And that group has been part of what, during the implementation work, I've met with, and I'm going to speak to that in just a moment, supporting them. And how they're looking at certification was a little bit different than I think a lot of other clients have, in terms of it's not about presenting, but about monitoring the work over time. What's planned for this spring, what's already set, some of the days had to be adjusted. I was actually supposed to be there for 3 days this week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and obviously that's been changed because of the retreat. But we'll complete the days for those 2 cohorts of special education teachers, and then we have another cohort that we're going to bring in, and we're going to be a little bit more intentional. They pretty much had kind of open signups, and to be honest, what was really exciting was after the first cohort went through, once the signups got set in place when we picked the days, because they're really limited on the number of subs they can have, it was sold out really fast. But we're going to be a little bit more intentional and bring, as if at all possible, specific sets of teams and really have them build a little bit more intentionally together and look at how they're going to implement it this spring. We still have 3 specific implementation days planned, contracted for as well. And then will be another group of certification that will go through that will only be the special education team of teachers, district level folks, and administrators that kind of oversee their special education program. And so we're going to be talking how we build in some aspects for how to write clear, concise IEP goals that must be tied to the priority standards. And really, I'm excited for that. And to be honest, I'm glad that group, we were going to do their certification earlier, and we've actually pushed it in a good way. That's going to happen now the last few days in April. One of the last weeks in April. And also kind of speaking to that, with the first group, we actually did a Thursday, Friday, Monday. It's easy for me to travel because it's just a couple hour trip back and forth. And really that extra day really helped. And so this group's actually going to go Friday, Monday, Tuesday. And that was intentional to not have the 3 days consecutive, not only 3 days out of the building, and it technically is, but just to be able to help them catch their breath. Because it really is, when we think about those, most of us in the room presented CFA and even did certification with the center, we think about it, it was 3 days and we weren't even adding any of the new steps. And the new steps aren't just new steps. They're really deep levels of new learning. When we think about success criteria, has been pretty easy for this group, but learning progressions and progress checks, that's a new element as well for any group, specifically for this one. And then really exciting because we've already done some preliminary planning, not any dates in stone, but I'm saying it's more likely than probable. It's more probable than possible. We're looking at this summer bringing in another cohort that will do 2 days in June, kind of their summer teacher learning, and then we'll pick days 3 and 4 in the fall. But then also, and this is what I'm going to speak to in just a moment, but some folks from the existing cohorts, and I'll talk a little about how we adjusted and slowed down during days 1 and 2 for some of the last few cohorts, but bringing them back for 1 day or maybe even just a half day on specific steps. Maybe it's just going deeper again with unwrapping into item writing, unwrapping into success criteria and scoring guides, which I'm going to share some examples that we worked on there here in this webinar. And I sent Larry the handout if you got that. Or learning progressions, progress checks. We haven't really decided exactly yet, but to make sure that we're allowing that the framework stays intact and the framework stays with the level of fidelity we want to have, but that we're allowing folks to go deep with certain elements and implement it well over time. And Larry, you and I have spoke a couple times where this is really, after the creation of the assessment, which in and of itself is a large-scale piece of work, when we get into the progress checks and we get into the learning progressions and thinking about tying that to the instructional sequence and what assignments and tasks that we're going to use, it really is a mini RCD. And it's really opened the eyes as a monitoring point for not just unwrapping and making sure that we're aligning our assessment work, but as our instructional tasks on a consistent basis aligned to where we're going. And there's been places where it's really helped and augmented it, and places where it's exposed where we are missing the boat a little bit. And then kind of planned, scheduled days for the fall for implementation into their PLC structures. A couple other points I just want to make, and then I'm gonna. There's a little spot that I put into these slides, so you guys can pause the recording and kind of reflect on this. Might be similar or different to where you've been talking about. But one of the things that caused us in a good way, cohort one, we really stayed true to the course, and that's what Karen and the rest of the team wanted. Adam, who's her counterpart, she's 612 executive director, Adam's K5. But there was very little pre-existing knowledge of the standards, and as much as they had made gains in visible learning and a lot of other things, there was really a lack of understanding. Priority versus supporting, that was completely new. And the idea of really developing district level priority standards is actually in the works. It's some of the things we're talking about for the fall. And then unwrapping. Depth of knowledge was completely new to many folks. So looking at rigor in that way really, it was newer learning than, to be honest, many districts that I'd seen in a while. And they were very honest that they had just not monitored when the Common Core was put in place, both math and ELA, um, any elements of PD to help teachers really go deeper with an understanding of the standards. And it was pretty evident in cohort one. And so that caused us to make some really, I think, quality, solid adjustments with the next cohorts that I'll speak to in just a moment. Also, it was pretty obvious a few places there was just some overly rigid pacing, especially in math. And some of that was because the director now, who does a great job, Christy Vay, at the 612 level, she had to rein some things in. But there got to a point, especially it came up in a couple of the special ed cohorts, the middle school one, that it was just so intense and without any level of ability to have the bridge element in there. And that has really been an eye opener, and in a good way done some planning this year for making some adjustments and moving into 2017 and 18. And then their district common assessments were really not aligned with some of the pieces that we were teaching folks in terms of how they read items, how the distractor analysis were put in place, and things of that. And so they've already done intentionally an overhaul of a few of them, so that we're helping guide teachers in the CFA process to understand we're going to be running our assessments with the level of quality that we're going to be using the tools in CFA for. But then your district assessments, which people are going to be looking at and monitoring those are going to be the same as well. So it's not like we have to say, well, this isn't how our district common assessments are going to be created, but because they are. And it was, they didn't know what they didn't know, but you can't just completely tweak and fix every district common assessment overnight. And those district common assessments were created, certainly with some administrative oversight and monitoring by teachers. And now folks from the CFA group are going to be the ones doing those adjustments along the way and tweaking those assessments to align with CFA. And in a district as large as this, with 19,000 students, pretty amazing that the movement we've made in 1 year. But realistically, we haven't even had a full year of CFA. We started late February, I think, might have been the 29th, or might have been March 1st, somewhere around there. So it certainly takes time, not only getting the language and the terminology in place and embedded, and we've worked, I'll share in a few minutes, with how we've helped the monitoring and implementation at the administrative level, but then also things, like I said, the district assessments needing that once over and that overhaul with the same quality tools doesn't just happen overnight. So one other point that I want to make is, and I mentioned earlier, and I think this will be different in some districts, but there was never a plan on their part to use their district CFA presenters as presenters to present the work like I would, which is why we're maintaining that level of tightness with how they are using that, using me to making sure everybody's getting a common message and the same level of depth and instruction. As we all know, even when we go through the certification, having learned the process and read Larry's books and worked with it for years, we need to go back and do a lot of learning. So it's all been about ongoing support for them. And that's been where, when I come back for any of the implementation visits, or when I've had a 1 to 2 day visit, meeting with that one group, sometimes late in the day and a couple times, because it was very easy for me. Proximity, just stayed over and we would do a 8 to 10 morning meeting before I would head back home to Indianapolis. But that was always that expectation that they were not going to be presenting, and make sure that we weren't giving out the wrong information and having people unwrap incorrectly or not understanding the process. So there's no plans for them to actually be presenting the work until into next year. And then there's a nice plan in place that we're developing so that they'll focus on areas of expertise. So it won't be any one of them that has to put a group of teachers in front of them for 4 days and get through everything. That's not going to be the plan anytime soon. So I'm going to pause here. I'll pause briefly. You guys pause the recording as long as you'd like, and maybe have a reflection on maybe this is a chance to process some of the things that I've shared. Maybe it's similar to what some others have reported out, Tommy or Steve, and then I'll come back in just a moment. I'll just expect you guys pause it long enough to chat, and then I'll come right back. So, welcome back. Hopefully, you guys had a chance to pause the recording if it was appropriate. I had told Larry that I wasn't going to try to be too long winded, but sometimes you need to just digest some of these pieces. So, a couple of points that I want to mention about the work in Valley View. And one of them was after we went through the first cohort, we really were intentional with the next group, making sure that they walked out at the end of the first 2 days with a real solid understanding of priority standards and unwrapping, and then immediately designing their post-assessment items to the unwrapping. There was a disconnect that was happening with the first cohort where they just weren't seeing that. And we weren't skipping the big ideas or essential questions in any stretch, but saving that until after they really understood the unwrapping drives the assessment process. So, and I'm really pleased at how that's gone. And certainly it's not taken away from any of the steps and any of the learning of the group. In fact, anything, I think it's augmented it because of what we were learning of folks' just real lack of understanding of what was in the standards. And then the first cohort, we had folks that they'd unwrap, they created their big ideas, and they went right back to just writing a test. Even though we created the document and the template right there for them, it was different. And so we had to be more intentional with that. And then a tremendous focus on tight item writing with the unwrapping and the distractor analysis. And certainly we know we're going to write the post-assessment and come back and evaluate it. Larry, as you say, now don't get it right, get it started. But the stronger it is at the beginning makes that part even more possible. And none of these groups were going to be together 4 days in a row. And a few of them had days 1 and 2 together, but then day 3 and day 4 were spread out. And there is not a solid PLC collaborative structure in place that could be consistent for teachers to be coming back to this. So we knew we had to capture as much as we could in those days. And we found the better the product they left on days 1 and 2, the more they went back and played with it, the more they went back and tweaked it and came back on days 3 and 4. And we've seen more success, not only in their CFAs, but also their feedback. I want to just share a couple examples. And I apologize. I hope I'm not going too long-winded. But I was working with one of the I don't know if it was 5th or 6th grade, so that would have been middle school or elementary special ed group. But we picked the standard for replacing given fractions with equivalent fractions, and we just sat down and we wrote 6 items together. But we were very intentional to calculate and determine where students would be making mistakes. And I know some of us have seen things like this, but it was really a powerful experience. They've been using Eureka Math, and they had the ability to manipulate some of the items in there or generate reports, but they weren't able to use that at the level like they could by creating some of these. And so as I was working with this teacher, we created 2 items. And then she said, should we go to subtraction? I said, well, hold on. Because part of what, and I think this applies to any group, but especially special education, Erica Erickson, who's the special education director, we did a lot of pre-planning for the group and really talked about how we have to, above all else, really diagnose and rule out issues with all students, but specifically ones that we know are going to be having some deficiencies. Let's make sure we go over and above and beyond to make sure, okay, it's not that gap in their learning before we try and move on. So instead of just creating 2, we actually created 6. And I just want to share this particular item. So I'm going to leave it up for a second and get quiet. Because if you take a look at it, the correct answer isn't present. The correct answer is actually 4. The best answer is A. Because part of what we wanted to do was determine, okay, are the students just going to the whole number? Are they just looking at that number and didn't really add the fractions properly? So we created 6 items. I've only shown you 3 here. And simple but powerful. For these choices, any 3 of those, students are adding the numerators and denominators enough that we need to address that skill. And one of the things the teacher said, her name is Megan Kraft, because I sat with her and we did these probably in 20 minutes, 25 tops. She said, I used to assess my kids with 25 items because there wasn't that intentionality to dig for the diagnosis of where is their gap. And then students pick 3 of those. It's pretty likely that they're able to correctly add a fraction, but they're missing equivalent fractions being a whole number. But then also with that last one, if students pick 5 and 6, A and A, they really have it. If they pick D and C, or either one of those, maybe they went right to the whole number, and didn't add it up because they knew it would have to be a whole number, but they didn't actually calculate correctly. So again, just a simple example with math, and I know math sometimes lends itself a little bit easier to diagnose with skills like this. But this particular example we use with the 8th and ninth and some of the 10th grade teachers who talked about some skills like this that they actually miss because they don't take the time in the pre-assessment to diagnose where might that gap exist. So wanted to share just a couple more that I pulled from some of the language arts examples. And in this example, which was actually another one from the special education cohort, and we had a real strong conversation around, and this was a shift for folks in terms of, as we all know, correct answer versus best answer. What do you mean best? Well, D looks like it's going to trick them up a little bit. Well, part of what we talked about in the particular passage that went with this, as you see, we were very intentional as they put their items into the template. They must put the degree of unwrapping, whether it's what part of the standard and whatnot. But what we talked about is the best choice was by far, if you read the passage, was the low wage jobs, which is why they were living in tenement houses because it was cheap and affordable. But right above that sentence was something about families were large and they like to stay together. And so what we talked about was if we could be more intentional with looking at D being they're getting it. They're so much closer to the level of learning that we might want them to be. Where before it was you missed 3 or you missed 5, and now we're going to make maybe some not erroneous, but some instructional inferences around learning that aren't exceptionally accurate. As Erica said, we can begin to buy back some of our time and realize students, they're not as far off as we think, but it is, as we all know, painstaking work. It's sleeve rolling up, and you really have to look at the item, look at the inferences, look at the distractors, and really dig into what we're trying to identify. But this was, when they got a good hold of this, it was so powerful to watch the quality of work, their ability to come back after a break, their ability to come back after when we needed to pull them together and get right back to work and really desire more quality working time. And it didn't take us away when we got into the next parts of coming up with the big ideas and essential questions, but they really understood, I think, at a higher level why they were unwrapping. And I think it's mainly because of their lack of understanding of the standards. I don't know if I would have done this with another group, and honestly, wouldn't have done it if the client hadn't directed me to do this. And it was so powerful when we saw the feedback. The other thing I wanted to share, because I know we'll all deal with this to some degree, but this was a 4th grade example, and part of what we were coaching them on was the inferences, we have to be careful, aren't context-based. Because when we look at this particular example, which had to do with the British colonists and Stamp Act and things, we're probably not going to read that story more than once. And so we need to be able to take inferences that are less contextual and more around the skill that they're missing. It doesn't have to be around the context of that story. Because the fact that in A, the colonist feelings, not the British feelings, it's not about that. So where we came in, myself and a few others who were giving feedback, is about comprehension is okay. Analysis of text is an issue. And C, it's not about mixing up colonists and British. It's a close reading issue because in the next story, they're going to be reading about something totally different. They might even be reading about something something fiction. And so kind of guiding them that when they're making their inferences, especially at language arts, not about the content. And sometimes it'll happen in social studies or science, sometimes it is. But certainly when we're talking about literacy, that it's not about the context of the story that can get us in the ballpark, but it's that they focused on one detail as opposed to the main idea that drove it. And that was something that came in some of the second round and some of the revisions, because it was probably as important with the group to focus on the quality of the inferences and the distractor analysis before we got into the item quality and some of the other tools that are, I don't want to say easier, but I think that that's an easier cleanup later. This is the one that we really have to think about. And then I just wanted to share after the first cohort, the next 2 and 3 that have completely finished, both groups, this is what we saw in terms of their quick assessment that they wanted to take internally. Across the board, teachers saying not only did it help them become a better effective assessment practices and help develop more assessment capable learners, we also were monitoring this. I feel confident on wrapping a standard because that should line up. And certainly we had some that, I'm still struggling with it. And then, but for both groups, and I will say, especially with the middle school special education, who we gave the same item to, and there was a lot of pushback in that group. There was just a lot of venting in the room, not towards me and not towards the work, but just some challenges they felt like they were facing. to a person, every one of them in that whole group said they agreed or strongly agreed the value of that distractor analysis in the assessment. So we're very pleased with that. What we're not doing is letting that group not be continue to be supported. We're looking at a couple of the implementation days this spring, possibly bringing back one or two of these cohorts or certain teachers within that group to go back and write another assessment, tweak the one they have, and make sure that they're getting the whole framework. But the foundation of unwrapping into the item, writing a distractor analysis, I got to tell you, has been what has really pushed. And the administrators are saying, as I've worked with them, differences in the classroom, differences in how teachers are posing verbal questions and things of that nature when we tie this then into the quick progress checks from the learning progression. So Dave's going to do what he should have done a while back and shut up, get quiet, pause the recording. You guys pause it as long as you need and maybe have a discussion around those points around the distractor analysis and that connection between the unwrapping and the item writing. I'll come back in just a minute for one other piece and example that I was going to share with the group. Welcome back. Again, I feel like a broken record, but I'm assuming you guys have paused as long as you need to, and probably you've heard enough a day if you're not even watching at this stage anymore. The other thing is I've talked a lot about that we're going to share, Karen and I, on Friday around that connection and that deep implementation of CFA because of the visible learning really came from their focus on teacher clarity. Everything that they did early on with the mind frames were around being an evaluator and a shared language of learning, shared assessment, language of learning, and assessment as feedback for me, focusing specifically on teacher clarity. And learning intentions and success criteria was something that was in place before we came in with the CFA. And so we did a lot of work around connecting that unwrapping again to the clear success criteria. And then how does that drive not only your effective, but empowering scoring guides? So I sent Larry the handout, so I won't go through these examples. You guys have them in front of you, but we're just really intentional. This is where some of the really quality work time came into play as they were creating the post assessments of taking the standards. And for this particular high school social studies example, with the supporting standard around writing an argument, focusing on precise claims. I'm not going to read it all to you guys. You guys have it on your handout. But another example of the unwrapping, and then coming up with their solid learning intentions that would be pulled real tightly in their constructed response items. And so here we see, and you have this in your handout, what their success criteria were. And you can see a direct, tight linkage between these success criteria and what is written in the directions and in the scoring guide. And the term, Larry, you've coined that I love so well, the hand to glove. The asterisks were just kind of noting that these were going to be pieces that would be ongoing throughout the year. They were always going to be expanding on claims and arguments and things of that nature. But then you can see from the direction real tight into the scoring guide, and just a buzz in the room every time, but specifically here because we had some real off the chart scoring guides and rubrics. But again, that achieves success criteria, and then progressing is 3 of the 4. Emergent is 2 of the 4. One of the challenges with the secondary folks is when we put numbers on them, if it was 3-2-1 or 4-3-2 or whatever it was, and said, how would I give a kid 1 point if he doesn't get this? And we had to coach them off that ledge, and we're still addressing that to some degree, but it really has empowered the teachers to create more quality scoring guides. And a lot of what the district monitoring was prior to CFA was around student voice, and student voice around success criteria, student voice around understanding what they're learning, how they're demonstrated. So this was, I think, an easier tie, but we still needed to put some time into it and help folks see that connection from the unwrapping through here. And then here was just another example. And again, this was done in the fall, certainly with the political elections and things going on. And again, you guys have this in front of you in your handout, but your essay must include these points. Again, you can tie them right back to the success criteria earlier that I showed that's on your handout. And then for this particular extended response, not only did we have the achieved criteria, but also the exceeds. And so again, that was a real strong piece for all groups, but specifically tying in that unwrapping, learning intention, success criteria. Why we're doing that? Well, it's got to come back into the constructive response items that we're going to be putting in front of students. And it really, I think, has empowered that step of the process to be even stronger with this particular group. Here was a math example. Actually, this is one, Larry, that I pulled right from the book and the handout, the unwrapping, the intentions. Again, you guys have this in your handout, so I won't go too long with it. And then just very tight and clean with the achieved success criteria fitting hand to glove from not only what we see in the unwrapping, but then also in the directions as well. So I'm going to pause here again. Maybe this is a good time for you guys to talk about how you see that connection with any of the work you've done. But I think that's a great place when folks are talking about success criteria, how we make sure it's tied to the unwrapping, but then it's got to fit right into the scoring guide. And sometimes we have to be intentional with those steps, I think, together as we're going through the framework with folks. So one more time, I'll pause, let you guys have a quick discussion, and I'll come back in just a moment for just a couple other pieces I was going to share with the team. Welcome back. Last time, I just wanted to share some of the support mechanisms I put in place, both with South Dakota, Valley View. One is that we have everybody work from a Google Doc, and they come in with it already set up. So we know the names, we've already created them, so they just go right into the folder. It's there for them, it's got their name, and it's very easy to not only have them start right there, but also receive feedback. And so just one example, it's just really easy for me to go in early in the day at lunch during those first couple of days and say, hey, if we're missing something with unwrapping, we can jump into it. And it really has been powerful for teachers to see feedback being given. They'll ask a question, I get alerted. I can give them feedback right away. And then the other thing I've done for them is sort of, I just copied one quick screenshot of an Excel doc, but a running list of, for every teacher that's gone through now, and we're up to, over 200, 220 to some degree, what cohort they were in, what grade and subject, was their unwrapping successful on their own? Was their unwrapping successful after feedback? This was one that I had just did a cut and paste. And then yellow just meant I gave them some specific feedback that I needed to see from them. And then their item distractor quality was there evidence of them getting that. And then if they had only done one or two, then I put that on there because that would mean, okay, you did it once, but many just mean they got it. They were getting the hang of it. And that was really something that was appreciated by the team, and also for them to then give back to their administrators and say, hey, you let your teachers out of the building for 4 days. I think this is something we need to be monitoring and following up on. And then you also have this in your handout. This was a school improvement plan that I worked with one of the middle schools, really tying in their park results, which is, Dr. Mitchum, superintendent, as he should, is always saying, how are we monitoring this towards large-scale achievement measures? But you can see here a very measurable goal in terms of students being proficient or higher, and then reducing the number of emergent. And then what you see here, I won't read it, you guys have it in front of you, but some very intentional strategies. And this is kind of a framework I've used when I'm helping schools with SIP. They'll adapt it into their own template and framework, but what they call their CSAs, their common summative assessments, which happen at the end of every unit a couple times a quarter, to be able to tie those results. They should see improvement and connections there. And then you see under measurable results, we should be looking at common assessment scores and report card grades. And there was a huge disconnect in their previous district assessments where students would be, because teachers had they were required to give them, but they could make them any weight they wanted. So students, they would make their common assessment. Some of them were 10 points, and then their crazy homework assignment worth 100 in a couple cases. I'm not exaggerating. That was a rare extreme, but that we should be able to see some correlation there. Not that it's about making sure that those grades are higher or lower, but that they're honest and accurate. And if anything, to prevent some unnecessary grade inflation as much as deflation. And then you just kind of see some other elements we monitored. Also were that under the look for the teacher surveys, and positive so far in what we're seeing in terms of teachers feeling more confident in their day-to-day instructional adjustments. And I think that is due because when we got to days 3 and 4 with every group, cohort 1, maybe not as much because we didn't go as deep. We made sure everybody got everything out. And I think going slow to go fast helped the other ones. But the learning progressions and quick progress checks, teaching them together, really, I think, helped them see what they could do with some of their day-to-day exit ticket assessments, where they're just more intentional in terms of what they're looking for. So, and then I didn't send a copy of this. If you attend our session on Friday, or even if you don't, this is going to be one of the handouts we upload, but I created for their administrators a question flow chart, because for some of their administrators, this was completely new learning, and not every administrator has been through the process. We're actually planning to create a sort of a 2 to 3 day administrator session on CFA. I've done several 2-hour meetings and things when they have their principals meetings sometimes, but to be more intentional with a larger group. But giving them some tools and empowering them. In one of the sessions that I came on one of their principal meetings, we did a couple of role plays. I'm happy to share what we did, how they would just read it, talk about the feedback they would give the teacher, and a few got up and kind of role played it for us. But to give them some tools for, certainly they don't need to read these verbatim, but to help empower them as they're having discussions with their teachers. And number 4 has been a big one. Because especially at the secondary level, even with some of the teachers who bought into CFA and were lining everything up, they're going right back to sometimes tasks and activities that just were simply not aligned to what they were doing, or they were going back to the curriculum that they'd always followed or the lessons they'd always done and making students jump through hoops and not really looking, is that really giving me the information that I need and want? Because I bought into unwrapping and I'm liking what I'm seeing here. So helping them have some tools at the administrative level. So this is really the last one, so I'm not going to pause and then come back. So as always, I'm sorry I could not make it, but Larry, it's such an honor to present your work, and I'm really looking forward to hearing some feedback from you guys. If you have any thoughts on this, please shoot me an email or just obviously see me when I see you guys on Friday. And then if you have any interest in coming to our session, we're really excited to kind of share a little bit larger picture of connecting some of the VL work that was really foundational to build in some of this deep work in Valley View. So have a great Thursday, guys. I'm sorry I'll miss the events, but I look forward to seeing you Friday, and we'll talk then. Have a great rest of your session, and I'll see you guys Friday.